Spring is in full swing, which means America's favorite pastime, baseball, is back. If you go to a Durham Bulls minor league ball game here in North Carolina, you can soak up all of the sights and sounds.
Yeah, take his head off.
But baseball is also a game steeped in history. And right outside the main entrance of the stadium, one of the very first things you'll notice is a collection of jerseys the team has retired. It includes the iconic number 42, worn by Jackie Robinson.
In the last half of the second inning, Robinson gets the first hit off fours. It's a homer into the left field stand.
A little more than 75 years ago, Robinson changed the world after breaking the color barrier in baseball. But integration in the South was slow going, and that's had long-term ramifications. Today, the number of black ball players is at an all-time low.
Before you can be seen, you also have to be afforded the things that are necessary to compete.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. This week on The Broadside, what it took to integrate Southern baseball and how one group in rural North Carolina is carrying the torch for the next generation. Buck Leonard is a Hall of Fame first baseman. He grew up in Rocky Mount in eastern North Carolina, and recently, producer Charlie Shelton Ormond got to watch him play.
2 on, 1 out. That one is absolutely belted.
Wow.
Back there.
That's great. I love it.
But here's the twist. Buck Leonard has been dead for more than 25 years.
Buck Leonard blasts off for the Grays.
Okay, well, it wasn't really him playing. It's his character in a new video game called MLB The Show 24.
We are so ecstatic and excited about MLB The Show 24 and featuring the Negro League storylines and having Buck Leonard as part of this.
This is Brian Patterson. Brian is the COO of the Buck Leonard Association. It's a nonprofit based in rural Rocky Mount.
And so we will have kids come in here and actually play with Buck Leonard and other members in the Negro Leagues. So cool, because I love it because they get the opportunity to actually say how great of a baseball player he was.
Brian also has a special connection to the Hall of Famer.
He married my grandmother. So Buck Leonard is my grandfather, step-grandfather. For me, Buck Leonard, of course, was a great role model and a family member.
He says the nonprofit is meant to carry on Buck Leonard's legacy and give kids a chance to do 3 things.
Play, explore, preserve. Of course, we're going to play the beautiful game of baseball. We're going to explore educational opportunities, field trips, and we're going to preserve the legacy and history of the Negro Leagues. They learn while having fun.
Let's talk about the play part. Every summer, Brian helps run a baseball league for kids in the area. There are 3 divisions for young players ages 6 to 18.
We were the first affiliate with MLB with the RBI program in North Carolina.
The RBI program stands for Reviving Baseball in Inner Cities.
So we enroll traditionally somewhere around 150 kids every year.
It's meant to help kids from underserved communities find and sustain a passion for the sport. A sport Brian admits can be really pricey for a lot of families.
It's not something like soccer, where the only thing you have to have is a ball, or a basketball where you can go out to many courts. You have to have equipment. This is the price of this equipment, and also because baseball is such a skill-driven sport, there has to be special training and instruction as well. And so a lot of our kids, especially in these under-resourced communities, just can't afford to get that type of help. So hopefully we can fill that gap.
Filling that gap is crucial, not only for kids in Rocky Mount, but for diversity in Major League Baseball as a whole. On opening day last year, African American players only represented about 6% of Major League rosters. That's the lowest number recorded since the league started keeping track in the early 90s, when 18% of players were Black. And it follows an ongoing decline in the number of professional Black ball players in the last several years.
we're developing a portal so that we can have these kids that have talent, that they have a way to be seen on a national level as well. Before you can be seen, you also have to be afforded the things that are necessary to compete.
This mirrors other programs the MLB is touting to help build up the number of professional Black American ball players. Brian told Charlie that for his team at Buck Leonard, it doesn't matter if you're in Atlanta or Rocky Mount. Getting a chance at bat can go a long way.
You have to remember, even though this is not a metropolitan area, it's a rural area. So there are a lot of small towns. So it's important to have an organization like this that kids otherwise would have an opportunity to participate in and play on a regional and national level.
So why is baseball unique as a sport, as this pathway to, mentor kids and build them up?
Well, one thing we can attest to is that with baseball, you're going to fail more often than not. And so given that factor is that you constantly have to pick yourself up. You have 10 at-bats and you're able to get a base hit 3 times, you're a good baseball player. So that's what? You're going to strike out or get out 7 times out of 10. So how do you handle that? All right? So it teaches us resilience, right? Perseverance. For a lot of our kids, and I've seen this firsthand many times, getting that chance at bat can be a disheartening experience. To take that failure and be able to cope with that. But love the game, understand that even when there's an out, there's also an opportunity to succeed.
Coming up after the break, how groups like the Buck Leonard Association fit into a rich Southern legacy of the sport.
I'm Anita Rao, host of the weekly podcast Embodied. It's a show that no matter the topic dives into unexpected territory, like what it's like to first get an autism diagnosis as an adult, or how BDSM communities may change the way you think about kink. You'll meet folks who aren't afraid to question what we think we know about intimacy, and who have some fascinating stories to share about their relationships. Listen to Embodied and let's take on the taboo together.
Hey, this is Jared Walker. I'm an editor here at WUNC North Carolina Public Radio. Each week, I work with Anissa, Charlie, and the rest of the team here at the Broadside to bring you stories from this fascinating place we call home. But we can only do that with your support. So if you've enjoyed the reporting and original stories you've heard in the podcast, please donate by clicking the link in this week's episode description, or go to WUNC.org and click the donate button at the upper right-hand corner of the page. Thank you so much. Okay, now let's get back to the show.
So this card's a little bit earlier. This is maybe 59.
These cards were only issued for major league players, right?
Usually, yeah.
Chris Holaday is a writer and historian based in Durham, North Carolina. His new book, Cracks in the Outfield Wall, is about integration in baseball throughout the Carolinas. He's got a ton of stories about Black ball players during that era. And he's even got some of their old baseball cards.
So another one's R.C. Stevens, who was one of the first guys. He was part of the Pirates organization. He played in Burlington and Kinston both.
I will say I did not grow up with any kind of baseball cards or any sports cards, but I love that there's a little cartoon on the back here.
Yeah.
It's got him catching.
Yeah, I love these old cards. I like the graphic design.
He's got his hand out, and the ball is coming into his glove, and he's like, "Come to Papa." There's like a little speech bubble.
Yeah. This next one is Bubba Morton. He's one of the ones who played in Durham.
Since Major League Baseball didn't come to the South until well into the 1960s, Chris's book focuses primarily on the minor league teams.
Minor league teams were so important for small towns. It was a source of community. People came together just to go to the game. It's where they met their neighbors and chatted, and it was a big social event to go to a baseball game.
Small towns saw their minor league teams as a life force for the community. But just like every other aspect of life in the Jim Crow South, there was a lot of resistance to making space for Black people in baseball.
There were some teams in the South that would not integrate, and It gets complicated because it was a major league system. So the major leagues controlled the minor leagues, and they would send players to get experience. A lot of Southern teams in the Deep South would not accept black players. Part of history that's sort of forgotten about what these guys went through. They were part of the civil rights struggle, just like, people who boycotted or protested in different places. But a lot of these guys, they had a role in the civil rights struggle too, just by playing the game, just by going out and showing up at the ballpark every night, and just by not being afraid to go there and put up with heckling and so forth. And that's kind of forgotten about. You think about all the famous civil rights leaders. You don't really think about some guy who played minor league baseball in High Point, North Carolina, but those guys were important too.
One of those guys was first baseman Aaron Pointer. Originally from Oakland, Pointer signed with a major league team out of Houston in the early 60s. And they sent him to play for a minor league affiliate in segregated Salisbury, North Carolina.
And all of a sudden, he was thrown into a situation where, if you're from California, it's very different coming to the South and Jim Crow laws. He talked about the struggles of that and being just unsure how to even deal with that, where he could go, where he couldn't go, where he could eat. Being in Salisbury, he said he found sort of solace in Livingstone College, a black college there, and he got to know students there. So he said on his off days, he would just go hang out at the college because he at least had a group he could associate with, because he could not associate with his white teammates. He said he got along with them fine on the field, but that's where the relationship ended. But the main thing he said, the main problem that faced pretty much all black players in this area was the loneliness of it. That they were not allowed to hang out with their teammates, that they were just alone. They had to stay in a separate house, a boarding house, usually in the black section of towns. There was just no interaction. So it was just a psychological isolation they had to face, which was difficult for a lot of them.
Yeah, it really struck me when I was reading your book about how a lot of people who didn't live in the Jim Crow South really had no idea what life was like, and it was pretty shocking, whether they were black or white. When they came here, they were really seemingly taken off guard by...
Yeah, there was one story. This guy, Bill White, he played for Danville, Virginia, but Danville was always in a league with North Carolina towns. He was from Ohio, and he was sent to play in Danville. So he was not used to the South either. But in one game in Burlington, and he was like 18 years old, the fans were heckling him in Burlington. Away fans were kind of brutal. And he walked down the line, and the fans were yelling at him. He just raised his middle finger at them. And I mean, that was something you would not do as a black man in the South at that time. This was like 1953. And so after the game, he'd insulted basically all these angry white fans. And they were in the locker room, and someone told him there was an angry mob outside waiting for him to come out. So he wasn't really sure how it would be dealt with. But he said all of his teammates came together and picked up their bats and had him stand in the middle, and they walked out with their bats and protected him. So he said that was the first time he really felt a part of the team there. And so that was a really interesting story. And that was in his autobiography. He's still alive, even though he's in his 90s, I think. But I did not speak with him personally.
What a story, though.
Yeah.
And as you said, this is happening at the same time as the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
But what was it that sparked integration in baseball in particular?
There were a couple of things. In the early 50s, the minor leagues were struggling. The minor leagues, there was a big boom in professional baseball after World War II. There were teams popping up everywhere, and lots of small towns had teams. And that didn't last but maybe 5 or 6 years. And then, Americans came up with other things they were interested in. They had television became popular. People stayed home, watched TV. So minor league baseball started dying out, especially in the really small towns. Here in North Carolina, 1951 were the first instances of a black player on a previously all-white team. And it was really because these teams were struggling. They needed people, and they saw the talent pool of black players that were available. So the first team to integrate was a team in Granite Falls, North Carolina. It's near Hickory. It's a very small town. They had a terrible team, really like the worst team in baseball history. I think they were 14-96 was their record. They were horrible. So they were struggling to make ends meet, struggling to find players at the end of the season. So the last 2 weeks, they needed some players, and they hired 5 black guys who were local players, who were really, talented local players to finish out the season. So that was the first instance. That was really out of necessity. But the next year in 52, several teams in eastern North Carolina really made an effort to give Black players a trial, talented guys.
So did this end up working to bring in more fans and help with their financial
It did
situation?
temporarily, I think, in the early 50s, but there were so many struggles of the minor leagues to make ends meet, and it was beyond fixing by a few Black fans attending. The Carolina Times, a Black-owned newspaper in Durham, said something like, Black fans could save minor league baseball. But a lot of places where there were minor league teams where there were no Black fans faced the same problems, like I think I mentioned Iowa and places like that. There were not enough Black fans to really solve the problems that minor league baseball had in the early 50s.
So let's talk about Little League.
Yeah.
Integrating Little League really encapsulated a lot of the racism and cultural tension happening within baseball during this time, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about the resistance to integrating Little League?
I mean, it goes kind of, with the whole, this was the time of like Brown versus Board of Education, integration of school, especially kids, that kind of thing was always a delicate situation. People very opposed to that. So the big issue was, or the big instance was in Charleston, South Carolina. So in Charleston, South Carolina, there were a lot of teams and they were all white, but there was a Black YMCA there. And the guy who ran that YMCA decided he wanted to enter his own team in the local Little League. And so his team would have all been Black because all the people who went to his YMCA were in this segregated situation. So people in other Little Leagues protested. The thing was, nobody would play them. So eventually they were named champions of South Carolina because they had no competition. Everyone else just dropped out. There was a big discussion of that. Some other states protested it. And officially Little League Baseball, which was very against segregation, and they spoke out against it, but they could not do much about it because the rules said you had to advance by competition. You couldn't just advance by forfeit. So unfortunately, Little League's hands were tied and they could not play anymore. However, the result was all of the white teams starting in South Carolina left the whole Little League system, and it ended up becoming Dixie Youth Baseball. They even had a Confederate flag as part of their logo and everything.
Oh, my goodness.
They just all quit the Little League organization in the 50s. And there was no Little League, really, for Black players, not in most places. So that really limited the options for young Black players to get involved in really an organized system of baseball. I mean, their original charter said it was really only for white players. They eventually got rid of that from their charter, and they do allow Black players. Even Michael Jordan played in Dixie Youth Baseball when he was a kid in Wilmington.
Really?
Yeah, in the 70s. So it's not exactly the same. And they got rid of the Confederate flag on their arm patches and everything.
Okay.
But it still exists, and it's not nearly as big as Little League Baseball, but Little League Baseball did come back eventually to the South. But all the southern states joined Dixie Youth for a while there, all the youth organizations for baseball. So
did this cause, Black children, Black youth to lose interest in baseball and turn to other sports?
My thought would be yes, because at least to some degree, because, a lot of kids play baseball just, in a field or, just casually, but to actually play an organized system where you have leagues and you have a system for tournaments and things like that, that was pretty uncommon. And that was what Little League Baseball offered them. It offered them a chance to, have matching uniforms and, advance to a state championship and advance to a national championship. So it was very structured. So we're talking from the 50s up until really the 70s, early 70s, that there was really no option for young Black players to pursue baseball as much.
So bringing this to the present day, what do you see as the legacy of integration in baseball?
I think one of the things is these guys were kind of forgotten. What they went through is forgotten. So that's really why I wanted to do this, was just to sort of give attention to these players who are often forgotten. There's a few guys who went on to be major league stardom. Most of them did not. Most of them were just guys trying to make a living in baseball. Some made it to the major league, some never did. Some just were sent home. They just did not have the skill it took to advance. But they have a story, and they played a role in integration and civil rights. So I just want to tell that story and, what happened in different towns and how different towns reacted to it.
Historians like Chris Holaday are preserving those forgotten stories for future generations. Meanwhile, groups like the Buck Leonard Association and Rocky Mount are connecting young Black kids to that legacy.
All right, we have a visitor.
Hey, how's it going?
Baseball season at Buck Leonard won't start for a couple more weeks. So in the meantime, kids are busy with other things, like planting a garden.
What you got over here?
Tomatoes.
Oh yeah, those look nice.
These are hot banana peppers. These are banana peppers. No, there's hot peppers.
The garden is in the backyard of Buck Leonard's old home, which is also a museum dedicated to the legendary baseball player.
Oh, cool. When you cross that threshold, you can't talk about nothing but baseball, okay?
All right, here we go. All right, just baseball.
That's Rose Hunter, co-founder of the nonprofit, giving Charlie a quick tour around the house.
This is the furniture that Buck used when he was traveling with the Homestead Graves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we just gotta put everything back in place like it was. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So these are all of his baseballs and trophies in here?
Yeah, right.
Out in the garden, it was clear that as the kids planted their vegetable seeds, their love of baseball was also taking root.
What's some of y'all's favorite activities that you like to do?
To play baseball.
You like to play baseball?
Yeah. I want to play right now.
Be on the lookout for Chris Holiday's new book, Cracks in the Outfield Wall, The History of Baseball Integration in the Carolinas, available this spring. This episode of The Broadside was produced by Charlie Shelton Ormond. Our editor is Jared Walker. Our executive producer is Wilson Sayre. Special thanks to the Durham Bulls for allowing us to record audio in their stadium last week. The Broadside is a production of WUNC North Carolina Public Radio. You can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. I'm Anissa Khalifa. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.